folks in Manchester and the International Society for Ecological Economics and the Degrowth support group for including us kind of at the last minute. Meg's going to introduce who we are in just a moment. So on August 14th, a couple weeks ago, an uprising of art installations and happenings emerged in the Old North End neighborhood of Burlington, Vermont, where we are right now. And 2 days later, they all disappeared. Through these art pieces, community members and local organizations explored today's tensions and the paths toward desirable futures. Burlington residents here navigated the neighborhood on self-guided tours using a map of the paintings and sculptures and ephemeral performances and interactive creations that were set up. And this event was called Degrowthfest 2020. Our neighbors took interest in degrowth. Degrowthfest was an occasion for community education and reflection and imagination in a way that the event could not have been had it gone as originally planned before COVID. So today in our session, we're going to talk about Degrowthfest some. So first, Meg over here on my right, left maybe, I don't know how that works. Meg's going to introduce who we are as a collective and us individually. I'm going to talk a little more about just what Degrowthfest was. Then Bar, who's just past Meg over there, is going to walk us through the virtual gallery of Degrowthfest, because now it exists on the internet. I'm going to talk a little bit about how degrowth as a concept resonated in our community through this community art festival. And then Christian, who's on the other side there, and we'll take turns sitting in this seat so you can hear and see us as we speak. Christian's going to talk about Degrowthfest as art and how it fits into the world of art. And then at the end, Meg is going to lead us through a little activity. And then if there's time for more questions, then we can do more questions. I think we have an hour and 15 minutes. So without further ado.
Well, this is a fun way to do a panel discussion. Sorry if there's cars passing. We are currently sitting on my front porch so as to be somewhat safe COVID-wise. We also, just for the record, all had negative tests the other day. So we're feeling good. So degrowth for us is an idea and a movement that sparks both theory and action. I'm sure we're all familiar with this, for how people personally and as communities might shift focus away from economic growth and productivity to a world where we prioritize care, justice, well-being for all beings. We also think that degrowth challenges us to reimagine the futures we desire, which we'll get more to later, since that was kind of the general theme of Degrowthfest. Degrow BTV is us, plus a few other local folks here. So Lauren Greco, Marina Rubio, and Emma Schoenberg. A lot of hard last names for you today. So we're a collective of local activists, artists, and academics, all here in Burlington, Vermont, United States. And we consider ourselves a local piece of the global degrowth movement, as well as kind of the local chapter of Degrow US, which is the bigger, smaller Degrow organization in the United States. So we also consider ourselves a movement among movements, which also led a lot into the way we organize Degrowthfest. So we are a small piece of a mosaic of diverse and overlapping communities, as well as in our community that contain multiple struggles and differing strategies, but that all share in common a dissatisfaction with the status quo and a desire for social transformation. So with this, our mission as Degrow BTV is to weave webs of support and allyship, challenge narratives that reinforce systems of oppression, and recenter our well-being away from economic growth and the market economy. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Uh-oh. We maybe should have tested this. I don't know. Oh, okay, there we go. Okay. I thought we were gonna have a little hiccup there for a second. And then, what's that? All right. Can somebody give me a thumbs up that they can see this screen? Yay. All right. So just a little history. So Degrowthfest was supposed to be a festival. It was conceived of at this gathering, which was a Degrow US gathering in Chicago of 2018. So we all got together. We thought, this is great. It was kind of an unconference. We learned a lot and got to know each other. Let's have something bigger where we can invite other communities and other people to introduce them to the idea of degrowth in kind of an environment that has like festivity and conviviality and all the things that we love and enjoy together. So that led to us, Degrow BTV, which is the group that organized the event, making this plan to host a few hundred people for a weekend of music, talks, arts, campfires, workshops, disobedience, and conviviality here in Burlington, Vermont. We expected that folks already interested in degrowth, plus some kind of degrowth curious locals would show up and share ideas and good times. We had a lot of plans around the organizing, so we wanted to do a non-hierarchical organizing structure. We had different mechanisms to do this. We used Fist of 5 in the advice process. We did a lot of check-ins, built a lot of trust between our organizing group, talked about how we were going to onboard different group. Like it was going to be bigger than any of us would have been able to handle, I'm sure. We talked a lot about pluralistic budgeting, so we didn't want to privilege monetary contributions. We wanted to invite people from the community to contribute in non-monetary ways, and we wanted to recognize that. At the same time, we were also writing a lot of grants. We had a lot of movement. There was balls rolling. Then, of course, as we're all familiar with, COVID happened. So we kind of sat back for a while being like, do we cancel? Do we not cancel? We're not really sure. We didn't cancel, even though all the other events around us started canceling, but we had to reconceptualize what we were doing. So we kind of stopped preparations for a while and waited maybe a little bit too long to start them up again. But we did, and we did in a different way. So this is a picture of us sitting in Sam's backyard. We're folding zines. We're trying to figure out how to make this a socially distant event that can include a lot of people in our neighborhood, but not necessarily people from outside of Burlington. So our big festival with music and dancing and cuddling with our loved ones turned into what Degrowthfest is now, which was great. We got the ball rolling again. We were featured in the 7 Days, which is our local newspaper. We started getting materials, which started to feel more real that we were actually doing something. I'll also mention we did get a grant from the New England Grassroots Environment Fund and the Leadership for the Ecozoic Project. So monetary wise, we thank them. That's how we bought that plywood. We're going to stop the screen share for a second here. All right, I'm going to pass it back to Sam.
So the community center Degrowth Fest that we ended up with was a call to people in our own neighborhood in Burlington, people and organizations to contribute art pieces to this neighborhood festival where there was just art installations and happenings around the neighborhood. So we distributed these 2 by 2 foot white plywood squares that you'll see some of the finished products that they turned into later on. So there are these 2 by 2 foot squares of plywood that we painted white to We distributed them to interested people and organizations who could make art on this canvas and beyond it. The canvas wasn't to limit the art, it was just something that everybody could have. And we had 3 prompts, and I guess I have to go back to screen sharing so I can show you the prompts that folks could think about. Should I do desktop or Safari?
You do the green one. Then you click the little blue button on the bottom right.
So our 3 prompts were what has been revealed, what will be brought forward, and what will be left behind. And in response to these prompts, what folks created was astounding. We made the prompts super open-ended, and they were partly inspired by a blog post by the French philosopher and science and technology scientist, Bruno Latour. And his blog post was basically like, a lot of things have changed during COVID. Many things that we normally do have stopped, and many things that we've never done before, like wearing masks and social distance protocols and working from home, lots of new things have started. And what Bruno Latour asked was, of all these things that have stopped, what do we want to not restart? You know, like what parts of the economy that have shut down do we want to not restart, for example? And of all these new things that we're doing now during the time of coronavirus, what are the things we want to continue, even when the pandemic changes or the pandemic ends and conditions change? And so from those prompts that Bruno Latour put forward, we kind of extended it to not just the coronavirus, but all the different crises that are intersecting, both acute ones like the pandemic, like anti-Black police violence here in the United States, and some of the longer crises like the extinction of species or climate change and inequality. And so we asked people, what has been revealed? What would we like to bring forward to the future? What will be left behind when we imagine desirable futures? How will that loss affect us? And so what the folks in our community, many individuals reached out to us and wanted to participate who we hadn't even invited. And what they created was really cool. I'll show a few right now before Bar walks us through the virtual gallery. So Emily Reynolds of the Burlington Tenants Union, a new group that's organizing the many, many renters here in Burlington to have some collective power against landlords, made this amazing piece called Everyone Needs a Home and No One Needs a Landlord. Self-evidently true statement. Jess Morrison of the Vermont Workers Center was one of several artists that we were able to offer an honorarium to create something extra special, pay some money for somebody's art so they can put more into it. And she made this from a wood block print, like basically carved a piece of wood to stamp on to the canvas. So in principle, could make more of these. And this piece is called You Only Get What You're Organized to Take. And I'll leave it up there for a minute because it's absolutely beautiful. So these were the pieces of art that were scattered around the neighborhood for a few days that people were walking around to look at. And on her home's porch, local musician Katie Hellman strung up these driftwood marionettes that she had created called The Dancers and accompanied them with a poem. Black Lives Matter of Greater Burlington and BTV Cop Watch, which is a group that films the police to hold them accountable, collaborated on an interactive art making and information table to raise awareness about their campaign, Think Twice Before You Call the Police. So they had a bunch of informational literature about that campaign, some of our Degrowthfest maps, so people who stopped by this randomly could then start on their own Degrowthfest tour, and a bunch of materials to spray paint pieces of cardboard like the ones you see in the corner with information and slogans about their Think Twice Before You Call the Police campaign. They had stencils and stuff. So people who came by this table got to talk about thinking twice before calling the police in our community. Others set up public comment boxes and painted utopian landscapes, quoted transformational books, and fashioned 3D art from found materials, and told fantastical stories to tiny audiences. And you can see all the contributions in the virtual gallery, and now I'm gonna hand it over to Bar, who's gonna walk us through a part of that virtual gallery virtually.
So hello, everybody. So I'm Bar, and we are just getting the right virtual gallery link up to screen share for you. And let's see. Great. Yeah, we can start here. Great.
Share screen.
Share screen.
This one. Share.
Great. Okay. So hopefully, can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see the Degrowth virtual graph? Awesome, great. Thanks. Thanks to Sam for sharing some of those pieces, giving you a taste of what our virtual gallery is going to look like. And but before we dive into that, as Meg had mentioned in our planning process, we really, throughout the whole event, there was so much discussion that we all had about how to embody degrowth within our planning of Degrowth Festival. And two things that, stick out for me that carried through even when we were planning a big festival. We were talking about like, how do we build composting toilets? And, when we were thinking about this as an in-person event, trying to embody principles of degrowth within it. And then even as we transitioned to the shape that the festival took, we still really carried that, I think, really deeply with us as, how do we embody degrowth within it? And really the two things that stand out for me that I want to highlight as I show you all the virtual gallery is this idea of really being local and community focused in a way that connected community members and got everybody sort of around in our neighborhood, sort of participating and having conversations. Hold on one moment. I hope they're going to go quickly. It's a very loud truck. Can everybody hear me okay? Is it okay? All right. Well, hopefully that truck has passed. So great. So community focus was like this big piece, and then also accessibility and thinking particularly about accessibility within sort of pandemic and COVID related world as well. So what this brings me to is for our event, as Sam and Meg both mentioned, we had these pieces of art contributed by community members scattered around the neighborhood in ways and provided a map, which I will, can you see me as well as the screen share? Can you guys see the map that I'm about to show you? So this was our in-person map, and everybody who was walking around the event, we had these maps set up. We're able to take a map, and on the side were the names of each of the pieces. The map showed where all of the locations were. So people were able to do this self-guided tour. Usually, we saw lots of people biking around to each of the pieces or walking around to certain parts of it around the neighborhood, using the map to guide them and find all these pieces. But also at the same time, not only were they finding these pieces, but they were also walking around, the neighborhood and seeing the different houses that these pieces were in front of and the different locations in the neighborhood, and having, conversations around with neighbors and other people that were there. So that was sort of where that sort of hyperlocal community focus really shone, I think, in what we were doing. And then additionally, the sort of accessibility piece and bringing us to the virtual gallery is this idea that we wanted that hyperlocal community feel of, these pieces scattered around the neighborhood, but we also wanted a way for people to be able to experience this if they weren't comfortable or weren't able to be outside in this neighborhood in particular, either people from farther away who had been interested in the event but couldn't travel here, or people that were here and just weren't able to or didn't want to walk around the neighborhood. So this brings us to our virtual gallery. And the other piece of this, which sort of emerged as we were working on it, is that Also, while this was a wonderful way to showcase the pieces that we have, it also allowed us to extend the opportunity for other people in other locations or other people even in Burlington to continue to contribute pieces in response to these prompts. And so that's what I'm going to show you here on this website. So as I walk you through this. So here's our Degrowth virtual gallery page. First, we have all of the pieces in sort of just thumbnail versions, close-ups of all of the pieces that that community members contributed. So I'm just sort of scrolling through so you can get a little taste of all of them all together because they're quite lovely. And so please do come to our website. And this is just a Degrowth US website, has the virtual gallery link. And then here's this button right here that says contribute. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this at the end, but this is a way that anybody can continue to contribute pieces to this event, and we can continue to add them to our gallery. So that's, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that more at the end as well. So our virtual gallery, though, like I said, we wanted to not only showcase these pieces, but also have more of a feel of the event as we could, so that people could feel like they were really participating. So if we click here to walk around our virtual gallery, and hopefully this goes easily. So our virtual gallery, what has been revealed, what has been brought, what will be brought forward, and what will be left behind are the prompts sort of at the top. And so this is a story map that you'll see on the left here. Hopefully you can see on my screen is the map of the neighborhood. And then as you scroll down, it moves around the map and shows at each location what pieces were installed, and specifically sort of installed in context. So you can get more of that sort of community feel. So for example, this here was the mutual aid squares for pieces of art that were installed by Food Not Cops. So community members that feed and share food with each other every day at 1 p.m. at the Marketplace garage. So this is a parking garage where community members go and Food Not Cops in particular feed people along with Food Not Bombs every day. And they've been doing this since the start of the pandemic. And so they created this piece to think about that. And in terms of the virtual gallery, so we have this piece in context, but then you can click through and actually see each of the pieces more close up. So we have each of these mutual aid squares that hopefully you can see closer. And then back to sort of the context. And then as you continue to scroll around the map, you can see, for example, the next piece, free meals and zucchinis all weekend as a part of Food Not Bombs. I'm just gonna go, we don't of course have time to go through all of it. I hope that you all check out the virtual gallery on your own time and are able to explore that really deeply, but I'm gonna highlight a couple as I walk you through the whole sort of space. So you could imagine even the way that we've had the numbers set is the way that we had it on the map. So you could imagine biking through the streets and seeing these different pieces in context. So, you know, we continue on. We go up a little bit north for a couple of different pieces that were installed. Farms in the future. Everyone needs a home, no one needs a landlord, which Sam had mentioned, by the Burlington Tenants Union, and Degrow US. And as a part of the virtual gallery on the left, as I'm scrolling, we had each of the contributors were able to provide an artist statement or a bio sort of explaining their piece or saying a little bit about how they were, you know, their process or why they chose to do the piece that they did. So you can, of course, read them along the left as we go. But again, I'm just going to highlight a couple. And in particular, think about, so this was a piece by a community member, artist who created these giant paintings. So again, you know, Sam had mentioned that we gave everybody a 2x2 piece of plywood, but of course, some people decided to, take it and do other things with that as well. So this is one community member who had their own giant canvases and installed those on a local's porch. And I guess I also want to highlight here, for example, this was an artist who, because not all of the pieces we had weren't always, they were contributed by community members, but we focused them in the Old North End neighborhood in Burlington. And so that meant that some artists were able to put their pieces outside of their own homes, whereas other artists simply had the pieces, and then we were finding locations for those pieces, which created a really wonderful sort of communication and involvement with even, people that had just the places or the locations. For example, this individual had a porch that was covered from rain. And so we were looking for where can we put these giant canvases, and another community member stepped up and was like, oh, I could display the canvases on my porch. So it created, and then they worked with the artist to help install these canvases, and we're able to sort of, so showcasing both the canvases, but also that sort of like, community working together process of showcasing them. Together. Okay, the dancers was a piece that Sam already talked about, but again, just highlighting this idea that not all of them were on plywood, but some were sort of more creatively displayed as, for example, these driftwood angels. And at this point, we're going to jump ahead. So on the map, not only can you scroll through and kind of get that walkthrough feel, but you can also click on any particular number and see what was there. So if we click on, I think up in the corner, number 9, these were 2 of the pieces that were done by, for example, or done by graduate students. And so just to highlight that, we had community members participate, artists and local musicians, and also graduate students from the University of Vermont. So really a pretty wide breadth of people. And in fact, if we scroll up even farther, and so hopefully you can all see the map on the top left of my screen. So if we click, of course we can go through and scroll and sort of drive through each of these pieces. But again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight, if we click on, for example, number 20. So we had not only, I don't know how to click on your computer. Okay, there you go. So one of the pieces that we had was called Perspectives from Riverside Apartment Community Youth. And this was a piece that, or a piece that is a compilation of, I don't even know, 20 different pieces made by kids aged 3 to 10 from the Recreation and Nutrition Program, Burlington Parks and Rec and Waterfront community group. So this was a recreation program, kids aged 3 to 10, and we were able, as a part of Degrow BTV, we sent 2 of us to go and talk to these kids about the prompts and then help them create these canvases on their own, and then display them outside their apartment. And what was really wonderful was that a lot of the times as people were biking by or walking by and seeing these pieces, a lot of the kids would run out and discuss, with whoever was there, like which piece was theirs and which ones they had done and who, which one their sister had done. And they were really engaged in, just as people were stopping by, they would come out and want to talk about their pieces, which was really lovely. And just as my last minute here, I'm going to highlight another kind of piece of this, which I already brought up a little bit, but this idea that not only were the pieces themselves, the artwork that people contributed, not only were those sort of what we were displaying, but as we were, putting these pieces up in the variety of locations that they were, it was also apparent that sometimes the place that they were in was also a part of the piece itself. So for example, the next one here was called Quite Good Vibes. And the artist statement, it's a tomato town, which was actually So not only was the piece, which you can see in the background, part of this, but also this tomato planted garden that was planted on the sidewalk in Burlington as a sort of a free for all tomato. So anybody in the community could take care of these tomato plants and harvest from them. So for example, this is another way that people who are biking around got to see these other pieces of the neighborhood and other things that were happening, not just the art pieces themselves, but also we're able to see, for example, this tomato town, or right after that, as we go higher here, we had another one that was a Food Not Lawns garden that was a little bit, a couple blocks away, was another pretty large community garden that was really planted and made available for the community. And so this is another thing that people now are able to stop at and see, that there's this community garden that, is for everybody, from Food Not Lawns. Okay, and so the last one that I wanted to mention before wrapping up was, if I go quickly, scroll through, was simply, very close here. All right. Was this one, which was Consider Not Consuming, which is was a piece by a contributor about sort of making choices and consuming, and how can we reconsider purchasing, etc. But what we were able to do with this one was pair it. So not only did we have these pieces, but we did have a couple of events, sort of socially distant events, that were able to be linked into Degrowthfest as well. So this piece was able to be put outside of a repair cafe that happened to be happening at the same on the same weekend, and we sort of partnered with them to showcase the repair cafe that was happening and put this piece about considering not consuming, but instead repairing there. And so, and then this artist in particular was able to then actually work and volunteer a little bit at the repair cafe as that was happening. So just another little example of, as people are walking through these neighborhoods, finding these pieces, they could also participate in these events. For example, the repair cafe that was happening, and we had others like storytelling events as well. And I think I am over time, so I'm going to stop with the virtual gallery walkthrough, but hopefully, what?
Continue sharing screen.
Continue, okay. I'm going to leave the screen sharing, and Sam's gonna jump in about how degrowth resonated with our communities, but do please visit the virtual gallery on your own time as well.
Yeah, all the different ones, the art pieces that Bar showed have close-up views of the canvas, for example, and other sort of in context pictures. So it's really worth checking out. Yeah, and contributing to as well. Meg, you're out of there. You are. But as Meg was saying in the beginning, before the coronavirus broke out, we had already intended to engage our own neighborhood in Degrowthfest. But the fact that the pandemic forced us to make an event to which we invited only our local community and not folks from outside who are interested in degrowth already was a really beautiful accident, because our event sparked conversations about our collective future and about degrowth. And many artists' contributions engaged with degrowth, even though the prompts we'd given them didn't mention the term. The prompts were what has been revealed, what will we bring forward, nothing about degrowth itself. But because it was called Degrowthfest, because we had some education about degrowth, some of the artists were engaging with the concept. So on his canvas, a local resilience advocate named Jan Schultz simply pasted a Stan Cox quote from Stan Cox's most recent book about the Green New Deal. And it was a quote that addressed degrowth. And there's one line in that quote in particular: whether we set off on the journey calling for the end of growth or the end of capitalism, we're checking our bags to the same final destination, preferably on a train. My housemate Becky Miller, as Bar was showing in context, created this pyramid of actions to reconsider consumption, from doing without to using what you have to borrowing, making, buying secondhand or repairable products. Another contribution from the artist Kim Marie Glynn and Jess Rubin of Myco Evolve, framed this adorable ecological scene with a sun at the top that you can see that's inscribed, "Degrow human footprint, create space for other kin." So people were curious about degrowth and, oops, let me go backward or just stop sharing. People were curious about degrowth, and festival goers stopped at our degrowth info booth that we set up. Oh, I wish we had a picture of that. To talk to one of us, a Degrowthfest organizer, or grab a copy of our cute little zine that we made back in the Chicago gathering. What is degrowth? That has all these little pictures of snails in it that I can show you. Our houseless friend Leslie took interest and went on this like guerrilla flyering mission with a short statement she had written about the economics of degrowth. Our comrades at Black Lives Matter and Copwatch told us that they had, at their table, they talked with each other and passersby about degrowth all day, about degrowth's resonance with defunding the police, about the concept's relationship with racial justice, and what degrowth might mean for our neighborhood. Different attendees interpreted degrowth differently, and for some locals, rejecting growth as a primary goal for the city of Burlington could release us from the rule of developers and business leaders and their allies in municipal government, which could open creative space for transformation toward justice and sustainability. For ecologists, so Meg's showing some of our, we had a lot of fun signage around the neighborhood and around our degrowth info booth, for example. For ecologists, degrowth meant challenging the idea that humans, and rich white men in particular, get to be the rulers of the land we share with all life. Younger activist conceptions of degrowth often involved reviving traditional practices and simple technologies of this region's indigenous peoples and its settler homesteaders, complicatedly, combining old wisdom and new thinking. And these diverse intuitions that people held already about degrowth mirror the plural understandings of degrowth in the academic literature. Think about degrowth as a critique to development from the Francophone literature, or the Barcelona School's anti-capitalist degrowth, or Eileen Chris' reversal of human expansionism, the literature on voluntary simplicity from, for example, Samuel Alexander, or Ivan Illich's Tools for Conviviality, just to name a few parallels. So people's intuitions they already held about degrowth, really, without having been taught anything about degrowth, really coincided with what has been written by, nerds like us about it. But the remarkable result of Degrowthfest for me in terms of degrowth is that degrowth resonated with many people in our community. So I'm thrilled, but not really actually that surprised that so many friends and neighbors were keen on this movement and the idea that's so dear to me and us. Others might disbelieve that ordinary people are into degrowth. Very serious online intellectuals who dislike degrowth tend to criticize the concept not because they don't get it, but because they think that the less educated masses won't. That's what they say, at least. So you can think of like economists or more establishment environmentalists who write about degrowth saying people won't get it. Yet it turns out that many folks think degrowth makes sense. We're probably not enough people to win an election, but plenty for a movement. And as a movement among movements, we can be powerful collectively. So the progressive academics and journalists who say that people or others will not go for degrowth should turn their reflections inward, because it is they who are averse to degrowth. Rather than projecting that rejection onto an abstract common person, they should own it and explain what they dislike about degrowth. And to be fair, some economists who write about degrowth will do that. We'll say, I don't like degrowth because of this, and talk about economics. But there's a lot of others who say people will be afraid of degrowth. And what's more, these thought leaders who influence people's opinions by definition, when they say that degrowth will be unpopular, that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, when we invited the public to participate in something called Degrowthfest, but didn't tell people what to think about degrowth, we found that the concept was enticing. It elicited curiosity. Imagine what would be possible if the media and public intellectuals presented degrowth even neutrally instead of degrading it and assuming that it evokes fear. And I think that we degrowthers sometimes get swayed by this idea that degrowth is scary to people. We rush to explain it and to clarify what it really means, afraid that our audience will be afraid by the word degrowth, that they will think we mean recession or enforced poverty or going back to the caves. Degrowthfest provided some evidence that many people do not need experts to tell them what degrowth is or is not. Conversations with friends and strangers revealed that the uninitiated often have a good sense of what degrowth might mean. So of course we're working with a biased sample, a self-selected group whose ears perked up when they heard degrowth spoken. But if we're trying to spark a movement, then it's good strategy to focus our attention on the people for whom our cause already resonates. So inviting interested people and potential allies to define degrowth for themselves welcomes them to our group. It starts a conversation and sometimes even generates novel ideas. That was the first activity we did in 2018 at the Degrowth Gathering in Chicago, which was the first event put on by Degrowth US. Everyone wrote what degrowth is to them on a sticky note before we talked about it at all. And I still have those sticky notes, degrowth definitions, and they're beautiful and plural. And I get that we want to differentiate our emancipatory degrowth vision from others that might involve limiting immigration or authoritarian measures. I get that we do need to, at some point, clarify what degrowth is to our movement. In yesterday's reflection session, there was frustration expressed that certain participants in this colloquium were misunderstanding degrowth, according to the folks who say that it was being misunderstood. And that's still here at this colloquium in 2020. But my point is that maybe we should listen first and trust that there'll be a chance to speak. I'm really feeling what Susan Paulson said yesterday. I wish we could all be together in a bar all night long, because that would be nice. And I'm really distracted. These are strange and kind of painful times to be putting on academic events like this. Degrowthfest was our way of cultivating a slower and careful and COVID-safe conversation in our community. In the colloquium yesterday, Vincent Leger spoke about how the younger generation of ecological economists is bringing into practice the theory of the previous generation, and I'm proud that with Degrowthfest we're being part of that. So before I pass it over to Christian to place our project into the art world, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that an intellectual giant left us 2 days ago. Resume share. David Graeber, who I've learned so much from, and I think we all have. Why isn't this working?
You should click.
No, you can click on. No, click on the screen.
And I ran into this quote from David as I was mourning his loss. The principle of direct action is the defiant insistence on acting as if one is already free. And I feel like with Degrowthfest, we tried to make it a direct action. We didn't ask the city for permission to put up art everywhere or any authorities. We asked the neighborhood. We asked people, can we put art in front of your houses? If so, let us know. Or would you like to put art in front of your own house? We can provide you materials. Walking around the neighborhood on a scavenger hunt for Degrowthfest installations, I noticed all sorts of art that I hadn't before. On streets I'd walked dozens, if not hundreds of times. So I think to pass on to Christian to start thinking about Degrowthfest as art, I think Degrowthfest turned the whole neighborhood into art, which in a way that it already was and we just weren't seeing, which I thought was really cool. So anyway, Christian's gonna talk now about theory and art embodied in Degrowthfest.
Hi everybody, I'm Christian. So this is actually that was a good introduction, Sam, to what I'm planning on talking about, which is just, I find this interesting, just like a quick overview of some of the art history context for this event and how it kind of fits in with some stuff that's happened over the last 100 years. And I think that idea of art as direct action, as part of broader political projects and imagining society has a lot of there's a lot of examples of that over the past 100 years, especially in this framework of thinking about art as this largely art market within capitalism, and a lot of these movements that I'll talk about in pieces that are ways to imagine art outside of that context, and sort of out from this sort of intense studio practice producing objects for sale to these broader community open-ended experiencing imagining projects. So one of the long overarching themes of the things that I'll be talking about is, and this is a quote from a book by Claire Bishop called Artificial Hells about participatory art. And one of the more important phrases and ideas that we're thinking about with this project and others is this idea that the medium is the message, and the idea that there's both the physical objects, but then there's the broader context of that they take place within, and that sort of there's two things. There's the canvases and the pieces that people made, but then there's also this sort of collective imagining process, and also the way that people experience the project that Sam mentioned, going around to people's houses and like experiencing the neighborhood in a new way. So this is a similar but very different project. So this happened, there was a lot right after the Russian Revolution. Before 1922, there was a lot of community art things that happened in Russia. And so Hooter symphonies were one of those, and those happened a few times. And the idea was that people would stand on rooftops. You can see in this picture on the left, a person standing on a roof, would try to conduct the factories and boats and like train whistles to like play music using the whole city. And so this was an experiment that happened a few times. This was obviously focused on sort of the like celebrating the like productivity that would come about in communist Russia, but still part of this idea of like imagining a future. This project, Hapsock, was pretty interesting. So the name kind of has these like different interpretations, either happy society, happy socialism, happening society, happening socialism. And this was in the context of the idea of an art happening, which is different from a performance, but is sort of more like the idea of sort of interweaving performance and everyday life, and kind of a sort of a blurring of the line between those two ideas. And so essentially a few people, like hundreds of thousands of people, were sent this invitation, sort of stating that the whole city of Bratislava was going to be art for this week in 1965. And so there were a bunch of different things that happened. And a lot of this was about perspective shifting people's perspectives, so that everything you saw in the city was considered art for this week, basically, was this project. This project, which I really love, is called Appearance. And so this was in Russia as well, I forget where, in 1976. So this invited people to go to a field, take a train out of the city and go to a field, and then wait for the event to happen. And then some people approached them, a couple organizers walked from far away across the field and approached the participants and gave them a certificate for having come to the performance. And then later explained that what happened was not that the participants went to see something, but the participants were the thing that happened. And that the waiting and that the going was the main event. And so this idea was that like the experience of the event was what the participants experienced. And so I thought this was an interesting reframing of things and related to our project in some ways. Also in like recent history, so a couple years ago in Burlington as well, a group of folks put together this event called Feverish World, which also provided artists a standard frame and prompts to respond to that frame. And so this was both local artists and national and international artists were invited to do art. And so this was sort of about the divide between arts and sciences and bringing those together and thinking about how to move forward in this context, specifically climate crisis. And then now we're experiencing sort of a series of overlaid interwoven crises as well. So this is some interior pieces from that and some exterior pieces outdoors. So this was up at the University of Vermont. One thing that comes about when we're thinking about Degrowthfest and also sort of larger participatory art projects and political projects this idea of the ladder of participation, where there's sort of this like idea of like how we delegate political power and like citizen control for putting things like doing community projects. And so from like non-participation where you're just like manipulating people to get what you want, or like how so people don't have much political power, to like sort of some stuff where you're letting people know what's happening, to like true citizen control where there's no like hierarchy necessarily. But what we're doing here is kind of like not really within this ladder. And I think this is where the power of having an arts festival and the arts in the thinking about this is that you're less about kind of a what's the right word, like no, like where you no, where you're trying to get something done and it's like you're very pragmatic, right? So it's less about like a pragmatic political strategy of like going from point A to point B, but about using the arts to sort of explore this and also be related to this concept of tension and all these things that are a part of these projects. So it's a little, I think, allows more ideas to come forward than maybe necessarily like a straightforward political process. Yeah, so a little bit more here is that a lot of democratic processes we sort of the positions are set and then people can like can fill those positions. But that this idea of the arts as being an unpredictable subject, which occupies the street and creates their own positions for participation rather than taking the positions that are provided by the dominant order. So like in Burlington, there's some community boards and citizens can be on them, but those positions are still provided by those in power. Whereas something like this allows people to just do their own participatory art as part of this sort of uncertainty and more flexibility and openness in those processes. And so this brings us back to sort of this idea of what the art of Degrowthfest was. And this idea is, well, part of it was the individual pieces that people put in front of their houses. And part of it was also the way that the event changed relationships to neighborhood and how people experience the work by biking around to look at art around the neighborhood. And so part of the art is the product, but a lot of it is also the process. The authorship is also like, is the authorship us, like the people who organize this, or the people who made the individual pieces? And so that I think is there's sort of degrees of interpretation there on like what the like how things were co-created, which I think is important to be thinking about. So I think that's
yeah. Okay, so I think we have about 15 minutes left. So what we're going to do with that time is an activity together for those of you who are still with us, and then we'll open it up for some questions. So this activity's only going to be about 5 minutes, so you don't have a lot of time. Going to give you a second to read the prompts. Pick one that resonates with you. You probably won't have time to pick them all. So pick one that resonates with you and just write a couple sentences in the chat as a response. And then what we'll have in the chat, hopefully, is a collection of response from all of you. And then maybe continue thinking about those after and contribute to our gallery. It would be nice to have more international involvement or more folks from around here, whatever. And while this is happening, we're gonna play a video, which was one of the contributions to Degrowthfest. So it's a local band, Marxist Jargon, which some of us might be in. And the video was paired with a free lemonade stand out front of a house. So folks could come, get a clean glass, help themselves to lemonade, have a little refreshment, and journey along their way to the rest of the festival. So with that, you have until this video is over to add your thoughts to the chat box. Me up for all our friends to share. Got it from the dumpster, but they don't care. Stop down at the magazine. Got it from the yard, ain't used for anything. It's green all summer, kind of brown in the spring. Turn it to dirt, like three sisters there. Trade it to your neighbors for some love and care. Stop down at the magazine. Because they don't care about you, they care about me. Goodbye to Sam, when talking he grows. He says, maximize the dollars is the rocket throw. Stop now, I'm a market machine. We didn't know how to build a lemonade stand, but the guy down the street had all the right plans. I wouldn't want to trade my mind for the money. Having heard about open source, honey, hot down. I'm a market machine. Yeah, I'm down. I'm a market machine. Yeah. 'Cause they don't care about you, they care about me. Crossing my cheeks was named. So I got a roll of fabric and it's all some roots. Just out there at the market machine. I hear your mom and your dad are getting kinda old. They got a piece of land with a swimming hole. Grab all your pals and move next summer. Start a little party. Take care of one another. Hot dog, at the market machine. Hot dog, at the market machine. Yeah. Hot dog, at the market machine. 'Cause they don't care about you, they care about me. Okay, we'll give you 30 more seconds to add to the chat. Maybe the video was a little distracting. I don't know. And then, how much time do we have left? I'm sure we have a few minutes for questions. 10 minutes. Oh, we have 10 minutes for questions. So if that's all we've got for you. If anyone has any questions about the organizing, the theory, whichever, lodge them our way. And all four of us are here to answer.
Okay.
Look like we have any questions.
There's not.
Oh.
Maybe it's responsive to
No, it's still responses.
I hope the sound and video quality was okay as we shared. But if not, you can find that video in the virtual gallery. Is that a question?
Oh, yeah.
How many people are in the group? How much population? So in Degrow BTV, there's, as a collective, we are
7.
We are 7 people. As far as population, the population of Burlington
42,000.
is 42,000.
With or without undergrad?
So it's a small city. This was also organized before the undergraduates mostly came back, so that makes our population a lot smaller.
30,000.
Yeah, maybe 30,000. So it's a pretty small city, but big enough to have a lot of diversity in.
Yeah,
things
we are
going
the
on.
4 academics among the 7-person Degrow US or Degrow BTV organizing committee. The 3 others, well, some of them have gone to school recently as well, but would have a lot of other cool things to say.
Oh, here's another. Did you manage to involve older people too, and how did you collect people's reactions? So we did. We tried our best, and I'm sure we've all learned a lot about reaching out to other communities through this, but we did try to reach out to other communities and had a lot of success doing it. So a couple of us dropped off canvases at the local senior center here.
And presented there.
Yeah, and presented the project, and they created canvases for us and were pretty enthusiastic and brought in like pictures and did some collaging on the canvas that we gave. And then we actually displayed that outside of the Old North End Community Center, which houses the Champlain Senior Center. We reached out to other old folks homes and senior centers as well. They're just the only ones that participated.
Yeah, I'd say, as you can imagine, the pandemic made it really challenging to include senior citizens and elderly folks because so many of them are isolating in their homes. But then when Degrowthfest actually happened, we saw a lot of like elderly residents walking around with maps, checking stuff out. So that was encouraging.
Okay, there's another question here. Besides Black Lives Matter, what other diverse organizations did we partner with?
Migrant justice.
They dropped out.
I think they're contributing still for Art Hop. So another thing, we had a pretty diverse group of organizations that we were working with. A lot weren't able to contribute with our timeline. So because of the way COVID happened, and kind of maybe as a group, this like slight reluctance to reconfigure the event with such uncertainty and how things were unfolding, our timeline to ask participation was only a month. So we gave people a month to create art, which for organizations that already have really full bandwidths, I don't think it was enough time. So we offered honorariums as well to artists and for these organizations that maybe wouldn't necessarily be able to participate. But what we found out is also trying to throw money at it doesn't actually work. So we gave the option to pair with an artist. Anyway, we thought about this in our timelines, and it didn't necessarily work out in all ways, but we were able to have a lot of great conversations with a lot of different organizations. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a lesson learned, really, is just that, like, you know, they say that urgency is part of white supremacy culture, and when we like try to reconfigure this festival and make it all happen in the last 3 weeks, it definitely limited who was able to participate. There's one organization in particular called the Black Perspective that's been organizing protests every week in Burlington, and now an ongoing one for the last week and a half that's been 24 hours a day. And they were excited about participating, but ended up not even being able to respond because they were so busy. So
I think there was another question embedded in one I already read. How did you collect people's reactions? Like people's reactions with the event.
this is difficult.
Not formally.
Yeah, informally. I would say a lot of it was word of mouth and talking to people in the community. There was something that for me was heartwarming and a little bit of proof that people were enjoying and engaging with the event, is that when we went on Sunday to go collect all the paintings, we actually ended up leaving them up because every time we went to go collect one, there was a group of people at it, viewing it and enjoying it. So with that, like we could have left them up longer, you know, like people were enjoying it. I also think Burlington is relatively starved for community events right now because of COVID. And the fact that we try to make an event that could be done safely for a lot of different people with different perceptions of risk, I think went a long ways in people's enjoyment and ability to engage. Well, when you say you are academics, are you all U of B? Yes. If so, are you part of the ecological economics community at the university?
3 of us.
Do you consider yourself part of the ecological economics community?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christian's a doctor,
Oh, yeah.
just finished,
Christian just graduated.
and the rest of us are
insects.
PhD students affiliated in different ways. We all contributed to the ecological economics book that came out from
Yeah,
a symposium a couple of years ago.
I think to various degrees, we all maybe identify in part as ecological economists, some more than others.
Meg and I are advisees of Josh Farley, who is on this call and one of the organizers of this event through IC.
And we all were or are at UVM. Another question, do you collaborate with the Slow Money and Slow Food? I'm not sure what's not.
There's no Slow Money chapter in Vermont. There is Slow Food both at UVM and in Vermont, but they didn't contribute to Degrowthfest. I'm an organizer of Food Not Bombs Burlington, and there's members of Slow Food who've gotten involved with Food Not Bombs. We have some affinity because of the shared love of snails with Slow Food. But yeah, it's not, to my knowledge, those aren't super active groups around here.
Okay, we've got about 3 minutes left. If anyone has any last burning questions, you can also send any questions to us at degrowthfest2020@gmail.com, which I'll write in the chat right now. Whether it's about our organizing or if you want to have a festival similar in your own communities. All of us would, or one of us would be really happy to talk to you about that.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Thanks to the organizers for facilitating this contribution to the colloquium.
I guess that means we're done.